Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me tonight. Please have a seat, relax. Have you ever noticed everyone's obsession with cameras? They're literally everywhere, even on our phones. So many photographs and videos that people share with one another and keep like little treasures. It makes perfect sense when you think about it. A camera is the perfect tool to document your very own existence, to show that you lived. And in a way, it preserves a piece of you for as long as that video or photograph exists. Almost like you never truly vanish. Quite understandable when you consider how finite life can be. It's easy to become obsessed. But sometimes, maybe that obsession lasts longer than that oh so finite life.
I've had several small jobs. It is that kind of market we live in, and I've been blessed with several talents. No one talent is big enough for me to have a single stable job, but I can't complain. Being a freelancer can make your life interesting in ways you never even considered. I have a lot of audio and video equipment. I can record small jingles, I can do voiceovers, I'm a wedding photographer. Pretty much an all round guy that's useful to keep around. My schedule is usually pretty full, and I can afford most things I want and need. It's been a good career. Of course, there are customers that make me question it, and lately I've run into a customer that made me reconsider my entire profession. Let me tell you about them. It started early August. I was contacted through a gig site by someone claiming to be a YouTuber focused on abandoned buildings and urban exploring. They wanted a series of long exposure shots. You know, the type where it looks like the sky is changing colors in a few seconds instead of hours, or where cars are going by at amazing speeds. That kind of shot. I've done a few before, and they're pretty easy. Most cameras have a setting to do it automatically. The trick is to make sure you're nearby so nothing messes with the camera, or steals it. Luckily, since these were abandoned buildings, I figured I could just chill nearby and listen to an audiobook. Still, it is a few hours of work. The customer was eager to pay, a bit too eager, perhaps. I was given the address of the first building. It was an old gas station outside of town, next to an abandoned bus stop. I'd passed it a few times and didn't think much of it. It just seemed like a kind of place that every town had. A place just forgotten by time. I scouted the area and set up my camera in a way that I couldn't see the road. This way, we got a great shot of the sky without blinking car lights. Great weather, if a bit windy. Still, I took a few drone shots as a bonus. It's important to make a good first impression so they come back later on. Key strategy to being a successful freelancer. Make connections whenever you can. I set up my camera, double checked the settings and battery, and just waited. I rolled out a blanket and put on my headphones. I'd be there for a few hours. The entire thing wasn't that eventful. I listened to my audiobook, packed up the camera, and went home. No big deal. Then I went through the footage. At first, it wasn't anything strange. The sky changed to a darker blue, the building went black as time passed. It was just like the customer wanted. If anything, I thought it might be a bit too dark. I thought about what settings to change in the meantime. Then, in one of the back rooms, a light came on out of nowhere. There was a shadow in the building. It just stood there in what used to be the storage room, looking out the window. It was almost completely still. The light was on for at least 2 hours, and I never even noticed it. In all that time, the shadow just remained there, perfectly still. Then the light went out. It was so still, I didn't know what it was. But it was too still to be a living thing. I concluded that it was probably something left in the storage room. It was pretty short. A few days later, after sending in the footage, I was paid to do a second shot. This time an old water tower. I was a bit weirded out by the first shot, but I figured it was just my mind playing tricks. So I did the same thing a second time. I waited for a day with clear weather and set out with all my equipment. The water tower wasn't that strange. It wasn't even that old. Maybe from the 70s if I had to guess. There used to be a billboard on it and a big light to make sure that you could see it at all hours of the night. Nowadays it was just dark and breaking at the seams. It looked dangerous, like you could easily fall off. So I set up my equipment, I put out my blanket, and I waited. Still, I couldn't focus on the audiobook. There was something about the shadow in the last footage that bothered me. Instead, I paced back and forth, looking at the water tower. Why did they even want this footage? This wasn't some hidden, mysterious building. This was out in the open, and probably not long for this world. Most of the older buildings were being demolished by spring. The sky turned dark blue, and night snuck up on me. After about 1.5 hours, it was completely dark. Then the light on the water tower turned on. That wasn't supposed to happen. That light must have been broken for years. Still, it turned on, all by itself. And right there was a shadow. This time it was much clearer. It was humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head. It was completely black, like ink. I was standing well over 80 feet away, but I could still see the silhouette clearly. It was again pretty short. What bothered me was that there was no movement. It just stood there, still as a rock. Minutes passed, and the thing just stood there. Still, I had this feeling that I didn't want it to see me. It was like watching a lion. There was inherent danger in it. It had come from nowhere, for an unknown reason. And now it just watched and waited. Did it know I was there? After 45 minutes, the light went out. I almost forgot about the footage, but I let it go for another half hour before I packed it all up. I sent the footage in, and I immediately got a response. They wanted another shot, this time of an old quarry not too far from here. They offered me good money for it, but that response time was suspicious. Were they just sitting there waiting for me to send the footage? How eager were they? I told them about the shadow in the video, but they didn't acknowledge it. This was the biggest red flag for me up until that point. I considered not accepting this contract and told them I wanted to sleep on it. No more than 2 minutes passed before I got another response. We'll pay double. Now, this is where one or the other will call me stupid. But if someone is this eager to make me do something I'm uncomfortable with, it's probably for a good reason. So I refused. It felt good to walk away. I didn't trust them, and I didn't care about the money at that point. Instead, I did what I had to for me to feel safe. I double-checked the handgun I got from my dad, I double-checked my locks, and logged out for the night. But they weren't taking this lying down. The next day I got a message about 2 payments being frozen. My payment for the first 2 contracts. This was ridiculous. I'd done what they asked. They couldn't choose not to pay for it. Still, my rent was coming up, and I'd counted on this payment. I had a bit saved, but this was throwing a lot of wrenches into my planning. But seeing the 20 missed messages from them didn't exactly make me feel better about it. I didn't trust them. Not even a little. I decided to ignore them. I blocked them, and I told them I'd take them to court. I don't submit to blackmail. Instead, I used my savings. I was so happy with myself for not caving to that pressure. If I'd have been 10 years younger, I absolutely would have. The following night, as I slept, I had to get up to use the bathroom. I drank a lot of water before going to bed, and I was just twisting and turning. You know the feeling. When you're comfortable and just can't get up. When everything outside the bed feels like ice. So I got up. My apartment was completely dark, but I can get there even with my eyes closed. I just stumbled out, did my business, and washed my hands. As I was about to open the bathroom door, I noticed the hallway light was on. I never turned it on. I had my hand on the door handle, edging it open. There was something out there. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. That same feeling hiding from a predator tingled up my spine, and I held my breath. 10 minutes passed. Then the light just turned off. I didn't even notice how scared I was. My pulse had been hammering in my ears. I was so relieved I cried, and I didn't even understand why. I immediately sent a message to the customer, asking them what was going on. I just sat there shaking in my underwear, rewriting my message 4 times over as my fingers kept slipping. I asked them specifically about the shadow and what they'd really asked me to film. This time, I didn't get an instant answer. I left my computer on, and the sound turned up so I could hear as soon as I got a response. I tried going back to sleep, but I kept looking at the hallway. I curled up in bed and just stared at the screen. I was wide awake, adrenaline still rushing through my head. After about 20 minutes, as my eyelids were starting to grow heavy, a response popped up. I crawled out of bed and checked it. Take my picture. That's all it said. It was from the customer. It was legitimate. A minute later, another message. Take my picture. Another message. Another. 2 more. 10. Soon, the message sound was having trouble keeping up. I turned off my computer only to hear my phone start ringing. I got up, stepped over my phone, and turned it off. Then the light turned on. Silence. I froze like a deer in headlights. I didn't turn around. I knew it was there, right behind me. There was an awful ripping noise as my wallpaper was torn. Letter by letter, the message appeared in front of me, literally written in the wall. Take my picture. My phone turned itself on. It buzzed with hundreds of missed calls. It switched to the camera app. I just stood there, trying to breathe. My heart was pounding out of my chest. In a sudden motion, the wallpaper ripped itself off and rolled up simultaneously on every wall in the room. Paintings fell off the walls. Posters curled themselves up. There was an awful shrieking noise, and I fell to the floor, clutching my head. The room was empty, or at least it looked that way, except for a pair of blue footprints on the middle of the carpet. I picked up my phone and aimed the camera at the center of the room. I'd take their picture if it meant they'd leave me alone. I forced a breath into my lungs and clicked the button. There was a flash, a voice somewhere in the blink of an eye, a smile, a summer dress with yellow flowers, brown hair, wet from playing in the rain, blood, a cracked skull. But the image was empty. My customer eventually paid me, and I only got one last piece of correspondence from them. She loved those places, it said. All she wanted was for us to look. We usually did, except for that one time. She'd played there 100 times. To hell with it. I'm not taking any more pictures. Just be careful what you agree to. That's all I want to say.
Well, you certainly don't get freelance work like that every day. And while I do understand why the freelancer was rather perturbed by the whole situation, in the end, I think everything ended quite amicably for all those involved, especially that little spirit. It's rather heartwarming to know that they got to stand in front of a camera a few more times before they passed on. I do hope they rest in peace. Well, that's all for tonight. If you enjoyed the story, please remember to feed the algorithm monster by liking and subscribing. Thank you all very much, and goodbye.